There is a moment in every man's life when he realizes something unsettling. The more he explains in love, the less he is respected. Not because his intentions are wrong, but because explanation slowly turns into justification. And justification quietly turns into self-betrayal. Most men believe silence means distance. In truth, silence is often clarity. This video is not about emotional coldness. It is about emotional discipline. It is about what happens when you stop trying to be understood by people who are not listening, and start listening to what their behavior is already telling you. If you have ever felt drained after explaining your feelings, if you have ever sensed that your words carried less weight the more you spoke, then this is for you. Because the moment you stop explaining too much in love, everything changes. Stay with me. Welcome to the channel, Stoic Love Wisdom. This is where you will find valuable lessons and tips to help you build a truly lasting love. In today's video, we will explore 8 things that will happen when you stop explaining too much in love, with real stories and insight. Don't miss the advice that can change the way you perceive and live in love. You will definitely feel more comfortable when you find a quiet place and put on your headphones. Let yourself relax and be ready to receive the positive messages in today's video. Are you ready to start this journey? Let's start together. Number 1. You become less emotionally wounded. There comes a moment in a man's life when he realizes something uncomfortable but freeing. Not every feeling needs to be explained. Not every action needs to be justified. When you explain too much in love, you are not communicating. You are negotiating your worth. I learned this the hard way. In my younger years, I believed love meant clarity at all costs. If something went wrong, I talked. If she felt distant, I explained. If she misunderstood me, I tried harder, words stacked on words, emotions poured out like proof of innocence. And every time, I walked away feeling smaller. Because over-explaining doesn't protect your heart. It exposes it. Stoicism teaches a simple truth: what you place outside your control will always have the power to hurt you. When you explain excessively, you hand over control of your emotional peace to someone else's interpretation. You are saying, silently, "Please understand me, so I can feel okay again." That is not strength. That is emotional dependence disguised as love. When you stop explaining so much, something changes inside you. You stop reopening wounds that never needed to be touched again. You stop reliving moments just to be validated. You stop bleeding words for people who were never committed to healing you. You become less wounded, not because people suddenly treat you better, but because you stop allowing misunderstanding to define your value. A Stoic man understands this. If someone truly wants to understand you, your silence will not stop them. And if they don't, your explanations will not save you. Most emotional pain in relationships does not come from loss. It comes from resistance. Resistance to being misread. Resistance to being judged unfairly. Resistance to the idea that someone you care about may never see you the way you see yourself. When you stop explaining, you stop resisting reality. You accept a difficult but powerful truth. Some people are committed not to understanding you, but to their version of you. And that acceptance hardens you, not into bitterness, but into calm. You no longer argue with perception. You no longer chase clarity from confusion. You no longer exhaust yourself trying to be understood enough to deserve peace. Instead, you retreat inward. You say less. You observe more. You let actions speak, including your own decision to remain composed. This is where emotional wounds begin to close. Because wounds reopen when you keep touching them. Over-explaining is emotional touching, again and again, hoping this time it won't hurt. A man who stops explaining learns restraint. And restraint is the highest form of self-respect. You begin to realize. Silence is not weakness. Silence is boundaries without violence. And when you protect your boundaries, you protect your heart. You don't become cold. You become selective. You don't shut down. You slow down. You don't stop loving. You stop bleeding for love. That is when love no longer wounds you as deeply. Not because it became safer, but because you became stronger. Number 2. The right person will seek understanding without being forced. There is a quiet truth every experienced man eventually learns. You can't explain your way into being valued. In the early stages of love, many men confuse effort with worthiness. They believe that if they say the right words, calmly enough, clearly enough, patiently enough, they can make someone understand them. But understanding cannot be forced. And love that requires constant explanation is already unbalanced. A Stoic man knows this. Interest reveals itself through behavior, not reassurance. When someone truly cares, they don't need you to overtranslate your intentions. They ask questions. They listen beyond the surface. They notice patterns instead of demanding speeches. When you stop explaining too much, you remove the noise, and what remains is truth. You begin to see who leans in, and who leans away. Who becomes curious, and who becomes defensive. Who seeks clarity, and who waits for excuses. This is not cruelty. This is discernment. In my own life, I noticed a pattern that changed everything. The women who genuinely cared about me never needed long explanations. A short sentence was enough. Sometimes, silence was enough. But the ones who didn't. They demanded more words, more emotional labor, more justification, not because they wanted to understand, but because they wanted control. Excessive explanation often feeds the wrong people. Stoicism teaches us to observe rather than persuade. To test reality instead of fighting it. When you stop explaining, you give others the space to reveal themselves. And people always do. Some will step closer. They will ask, "What do you mean?" They will reflect instead of accuse. They will try to meet you where you are. Others will retreat. They will grow colder, dismissive, impatient. They will label your silence as distance or arrogance. And that reaction tells you everything. A man who explains less begins to respect himself more. Because he no longer assumes responsibility for someone else's unwillingness to understand. He realizes. If someone is invested, they will bridge the gap. If they are not, they will complain about the distance. This shift is subtle, but powerful. You stop chasing emotional approval. You stop arguing your intentions. You stop trying to be clear enough to earn patience. Instead, you stand where you are, calm, grounded, composed. And here's the paradox. When you stop forcing understanding, understanding often comes naturally. Because people sense confidence. They feel emotional self-sufficiency. They recognize when a man is not desperate to be accepted. This doesn't mean you become indifferent. It means you become anchored. Anchored men don't over-communicate. They communicate when it matters, and withdraw when it doesn't. They know that love is not proven by explanations, but by consistent presence and aligned actions. If someone needs you to constantly justify yourself, they are not trying to know you. They are trying to manage you. And a Stoic man refuses to negotiate his dignity. He understands this final truth. The right person will seek understanding. They won't need to be dragged there by your words. They will walk there on their own. In love, sometimes we don't need too many promises, but just a little understanding in a heart that knows how to listen. It is the experiences, both happy and sad, that help us mature and know how to love more fully. Here, I want to contemplate those things with you, so that each step in the journey of love becomes more clear-headed and peaceful. If you feel that what I share is valuable, please click like to support this video. And if this is your first visit, please click subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss the next insightful perspectives on love. I also really want to hear from you. What do you like most about today's story? Leave a comment below, because who knows, your experience might be a great source of encouragement for someone else who is listening. And now, let's continue to explore what's waiting for you. Number 3. You reclaim your personal power. There is a form of power most men don't realize they are giving away. Not through money, status, or time, but through explanation. Every time you over-explain in love, you are unconsciously saying, "I need your approval to feel at peace." That is not communication. That is surrender. Personal power is not dominance. It is not control over others. It is control over yourself, your emotions, your reactions, your sense of worth. And nothing drains that power faster than trying to convince someone to see you differently. I've seen strong men become emotionally weak not because they lacked value, but because they kept trying to prove it. They explained their intentions. They justified their boundaries. They defended their silence. They clarified their tone. And in doing so, they trained others to question them. Stoicism teaches a hard lesson. What needs constant defense is already unstable. When you stop explaining too much, you stop positioning yourself beneath someone else's judgment. You no longer wait for permission to be understood. You no longer argue your truth. You no longer chase validation. You stand still, and let reality speak. This is where power returns. Because a man with personal power does not rush to correct every misunderstanding. He understands that clarity is not always his responsibility. If someone misreads him, he observes. If someone doubts him, he pauses. If someone challenges his boundaries, he reinforces them with action, not speeches. Silence becomes a filter. Those who respect you will approach carefully. Those who seek control will push harder. And in both cases, you gain information without losing yourself. Over-explaining often comes from fear. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being replaced. But fear is the opposite of power. A Stoic man does not eliminate fear. He refuses to let it dictate his behavior. When you explain less, you accept uncertainty. You allow space for others to respond freely. And in that space, true dynamics reveal themselves. You also stop managing other people's emotions. You no longer feel responsible for how they interpret your actions. You no longer bend your language to soften their discomfort. You no longer exhaust yourself maintaining emotional balance for two. That responsibility was never yours. Power returns when you reclaim emotional autonomy. You begin to feel grounded again. Your words become fewer, but heavier. Your presence becomes calmer, but more noticeable. People start listening, not because you speak more, but because you speak from certainty, not defense. This shift changes the way love feels. You are no longer negotiating your place in someone's life. You are choosing whether they deserve a place in yours. And that reversal is everything. A man who explains too much is trying to earn belonging. A man who explains only when necessary belongs to himself first. Stoicism is not about emotional withdrawal. It is about emotional authority. You still communicate. But you don't chase understanding. You still love. But you don't sacrifice your center. You stop explaining. And in that silence, your power comes back to you. Not loudly. Not aggressively. But unmistakably. Number 4. You gain clarity about the relationship. Clarity in love rarely comes from long conversations. It comes from patterns. And nothing reveals patterns faster than silence. When you stop explaining too much, you remove the emotional fog that words create. You stop smoothing over tension. You stop softening reality. You stop filling in the gaps for someone else. And suddenly, things become clear. A Stoic man understands that confusion in a relationship is often artificial. It is maintained by constant talking, constant justifying, constant emotional labor. When you explain, you cover up inconsistency. When you explain, you excuse indifference. When you explain, you delay the truth. Silence does the opposite. Silence exposes. I've watched men stay in relationships far longer than they should. Not because they were loved, but because they kept explaining their way out of every red flag. She didn't mean it. She's just stressed. I didn't explain myself well enough. These are not insights. They are defenses against reality. When you stop explaining, you stop protecting illusions. You see how the other person responds when you are no longer managing the relationship for them. Do they reach out? Do they ask questions? Do they show concern? Or do they become distant, irritated, cold? That reaction is information. A Stoic man respects information more than hope. Clarity arrives when you allow people to act without interference. If someone cares, your silence will make them curious, not careless. If someone is invested, your restraint will draw them closer, not push them away. But if someone relies on your explanations to stay comfortable, your silence will feel like a threat. And that tells you everything. Over-explaining often keeps unhealthy dynamics alive. It gives the other person endless chances to avoid accountability. You explain your boundaries. They ignore them. You explain your feelings. They minimize them. You explain your expectations. They forget them. And then you explain again. This cycle creates confusion. Not because the situation is complex, but because you refuse to accept what is being shown to you. When you stop explaining, the cycle breaks. There is no argument to hide behind. No words to twist. No emotional smokescreen. Only actions. And actions are honest. Clarity also brings responsibility. Once you see the truth, you can no longer pretend you don't know. You can no longer blame misunderstanding. You can no longer say, if only I had explained better. A Stoic man accepts this burden. He knows that clarity sometimes leads to uncomfortable decisions. But confusion keeps you trapped. Clarity sets you free. You begin to recognize the difference between someone who struggles but tries, and someone who benefits from your effort without giving back. Between temporary distance and permanent emotional absence. When you stop explaining, you stop negotiating with uncertainty. You let the relationship show its true shape. And once you see it clearly, you regain the ability to choose. Stay, consciously. Or leave, calmly. Not in anger. Not in drama. But in alignment with reality. This is Stoic love. Not romantic illusion. Not emotional chaos. But clear-eyed connection. Number 5. You learn to value inner peace over being understood. There comes a point in a man's life when he understands a quiet but life-altering truth. Being understood is comforting. Being at peace is necessary. In the beginning, many men chase understanding as if it were oxygen. They explain their intentions. They clarify their tone. They defend their silence. All in the hope that once they are understood, the tension will disappear. But it rarely does. Because understanding depends on others. Peace depends on you. A Stoic man learns to prioritize what is within his control. You can speak clearly. You can act consistently. But you cannot force someone to receive you honestly. When you stop explaining too much, you begin to detach your emotional well-being from someone else's comprehension. And that is when peace enters. At first, it feels uncomfortable. Silence feels like risk. Misunderstanding feels unresolved. Your instinct tells you to fix it, to say more, to soften it, to clarify again. But Stoicism teaches restraint over impulse. Not every tension needs resolution. Not every silence needs filling. Not every misunderstanding deserves your energy. Some discomfort must simply be allowed. And when you allow it, something powerful happens. You stop chasing emotional closure from people who cannot give it. You stop sacrificing your calm just to feel seen. You stop negotiating your inner state. You begin to notice how much energy you used to spend on explanation. And how little peace it brought you. A man at peace does not need to be constantly understood. He needs to be aligned with himself. He knows who he is. He knows what he meant. And that is enough. This doesn't make him cold. It makes him grounded. He still explains when it matters. But he no longer explains to relieve anxiety. He chooses silence when speaking would disturb his balance. And that choice changes everything. People sense it. They feel the calm. They feel the emotional independence. They feel that this man is not desperate to be validated. Ironically, this is when understanding often arrives, naturally, without force. But even if it doesn't, the Stoic man remains steady. Because he no longer ties his peace to being interpreted correctly. He understands a final truth. Peace is the reward of self-respect. When you stop explaining, you stop fighting reality. You stop arguing with perception. You stop exhausting yourself emotionally. You sit with what is. And in that stillness, you reclaim your center. This is not passivity. This is mastery. A man who values inner peace moves differently. He responds instead of reacts. He chooses instead of pleads. Love no longer destabilizes him. It complements him, or it doesn't belong. Because peace is not something you negotiate for in a relationship. It is something you bring with you. And if a connection threatens it, you already have your answer. Love is actually like a mirror reflecting the inner self. When we are calm enough, we will realize that every challenge, every silence carries a valuable lesson. And that is what I want to convey through each story on this channel. If you feel that these shares bring value, please leave a like to support the channel. And don't forget to subscribe, because who knows, one day, just a small idea from these videos can change the way you look at love, at yourself. Let's continue with me, because there are many interesting things waiting for you to discover. Number 6. Others begin to respect you without you demanding it. Respect is not created by explanation. It is revealed by presence. A man who explains too much often believes he is being fair, open, reasonable. In reality, he is teaching others how to treat him. Every unnecessary justification is a quiet permission. Every emotional defense is an invitation to question his boundaries. Every attempt to clear things up weakens his position. Stoicism teaches that respect cannot be negotiated. It must be embodied. When you stop explaining, people feel the shift immediately. Not because you become louder. Not because you become colder. But because you become grounded. You no longer rush to defend yourself. You no longer panic at misunderstanding. You no longer overreact to emotional pressure. And that calm unsettles those who relied on your emotional reactions. Some will test you. They will push harder. They will provoke. They will accuse you of being distant, arrogant, or uncaring. This is not a problem. This is information. People often confuse accessibility with respect. But true respect grows when others realize they cannot easily move you. A Stoic man does not demand respect. He makes it the natural consequence of his behavior. He speaks when necessary. He withdraws when appropriate. He does not over-explain his standards, he lives them. And when standards are lived consistently, they are felt. Respect appears when others sense that. You are not afraid of silence. You are not dependent on approval. You are not emotionally reactive. This changes the dynamic completely. People become more careful with their words. More intentional with their actions. More aware of your boundaries. Not because you ask them to be, but because your presence requires it. Over-explaining invites debate. Silence invites reflection. When you explain every decision, people feel entitled to evaluate it. When you stand by your decisions quietly, people adjust. This is not manipulation. This is alignment. A man who respects himself does not fear being misunderstood. He fears being disrespectful to his own standards. And that fear keeps him steady. There is also a deeper layer to this. When you stop explaining, you stop performing. You stop trying to appear reasonable, agreeable, or emotionally available at all times. You become real. And reality commands respect. Some people will leave when they realize they can no longer control the narrative. They will say you've changed. They will say you've become distant. Let them. Respect often costs access. A Stoic man understands that not everyone deserves full entry into his inner world. When you stop explaining, you filter relationships naturally. Those who value you will adjust. Those who relied on your compliance will resist. And both outcomes are wins. Because respect is not about being liked. It is about being treated correctly. And when you carry yourself with restraint, clarity, and calm, without justifying every move, others feel it. They may not say it, but they respond to it. That is respect. Not demanded. Not explained. But earned through presence. Number 7. You stop losing yourself in love. One of the most dangerous things a man can lose in love is not the relationship. It is himself. It rarely happens all at once. It happens quietly. A boundary explained away. A value softened. A reaction restrained not out of strength, but out of fear. Over time, the man becomes unfamiliar to himself. Over-explaining is often the first sign of this loss. When you explain too much, you are adjusting your identity to fit someone else's comfort. You are reshaping your truth so it will be easier to accept. You are slowly editing yourself. Stoicism teaches that a man must be internally consistent. That his words, actions, and values must align. The moment you start explaining your core too often, that alignment breaks. You begin to compromise your center. You say things you don't fully believe just to keep peace. You apologize for boundaries. You justify silence that was never wrong. And slowly, you forget who you were before you started asking for permission to be yourself. When you stop explaining, you stop self-betrayal. You allow yourself to exist without constant translation. You allow your personality to be firm, not softened by fear of rejection. A Stoic man does not dilute himself to be loved. He refines himself to be whole. There is a subtle but important difference. Refinement strengthens. Dilution weakens. When you explain less, your identity stabilizes. You no longer shape-shift to maintain harmony. You no longer absorb emotional chaos that doesn't belong to you. You no longer carry responsibility for someone else's comfort at the expense of your truth. This does not mean you become rigid. It means you become rooted. A rooted man can bend. But he does not break. Love, at its best, should deepen who you are. Not replace you with a quieter, smaller version of yourself. But that only happens when you protect your internal boundaries. When you stop explaining, you stop eroding those boundaries. You speak when your values are involved. You stay silent when the argument is pointless. You walk away when alignment is lost. And in doing so, you preserve yourself. Many men fear that if they don't explain, they will be misunderstood and abandoned. But the greater danger is this. If you keep explaining, you may stay, but you won't recognize yourself. Stoicism prioritizes integrity over attachment. A man who loses himself in love may keep the relationship. But he loses respect, peace, and direction. A man who keeps himself may lose the relationship. But he remains intact. And an intact man can build again. When you stop explaining, you stop chasing approval. You stop bending your identity for emotional safety. You stop trading authenticity for acceptance. You return to yourself. And from that place, love becomes a choice, not a survival strategy. That is Stoic love. Number 8. You know when to stay, and when to walk away. One of the greatest strengths a man can develop in love is not endurance. It is discernment. Knowing when to stay is easy when things feel good. Knowing when to walk away requires clarity and courage. Most men don't stay in the wrong relationships because they are weak. They stay because they keep explaining. They explain the red flags. They explain the distance. They explain the disrespect. And in doing so, they delay the inevitable. Stoicism teaches that wisdom is the ability to see reality as it is. Not as we wish it to be. When you stop explaining, reality has nowhere to hide. You stop narrating the relationship in your head. You stop filling in emotional gaps with hope. You stop assuming potential is the same as effort. You observe. You notice how someone treats you when you are calm. You notice whether they move toward you or away from you when you no longer chase. You notice whether respect remains when emotional labor disappears. These observations answer the question you've been avoiding. A Stoic man understands this. If a relationship only survives because you keep explaining it, it is already dying. Staying is no longer an emotional reflex. It becomes a conscious choice. Walking away is no longer dramatic. It becomes a logical conclusion. When you stop explaining, you remove self-deception. You stop saying, "They'll change if I say it differently. They just need time." They don't mean it. Instead, you ask a simpler, harder question. Is this aligned with who I am and how I choose to live? And when the answer is no, you act. Not out of anger. Not to punish. Not to prove a point. But out of self-respect. Walking away is not failure. It is precision. It is the ability to cut cleanly instead of bleeding slowly. Stoicism does not romanticize suffering. It does not reward endurance without purpose. A man who knows his worth does not remain where he is tolerated instead of valued. When you stop explaining, you stop bargaining with reality. You accept that love must be mutual, not managed. That effort must be shared, not carried. That respect must be consistent, not negotiated. And in that acceptance, your path becomes clear. Stay where your silence is respected. Stay where your presence is valued. Stay where your peace is protected. Walk away from confusion. Walk away from indifference. Walk away from relationships that require you to shrink. Not loudly. Not bitterly. But with composure. Because a Stoic man does not leave to escape pain. He leaves to remain whole. And once you learn this, love no longer controls you. You choose it. Or you release it. Without explanation. Conclusion. At some point, every man must face a simple but uncomfortable truth. Love does not reward those who explain the most. It reveals those who know when to stop. When you stop explaining too much in love, you are not becoming distant. You are becoming deliberate. You are choosing self-respect over emotional exhaustion. Clarity over confusion. Peace over the endless need to be understood. Stoic love is not about withholding emotion. It is about mastery over it. You learn that not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every silence needs filling. Not every relationship deserves your full access. Some connections fade when you stop explaining. Not because you did something wrong. But because your effort was the only thing holding them together. And that realization, while painful, is freeing. You begin to see love for what it truly is. A shared space, not a performance. A mutual effort, not a negotiation. When you stop explaining, you stop shrinking yourself for comfort. You stop bending your truth to avoid loss. You stop confusing attachment with loyalty. You return to yourself. And from that place, your choices become clear. You stay where respect exists without force. You speak where words are received, not resisted. You walk away where your presence is tolerated but not valued. Not with anger. Not with regret. But with calm certainty. Because a man who no longer explains his worth has already understood it. And that understanding changes everything. Thank you for taking the time to watch today's video. Hopefully the sharing about love and lessons from this video will help you have new thoughts and find empathy. If you find the video useful, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel and share with those around you. Each of us has our own stories about love, and I'm happy to explore them with you. See you in the next videos. Wishing you a wonderful day filled with love.